So in the early part of the 20th century, Dublin was a bustling city. The port itself was booming. A lot of money had been invested, electricity, power station had been established. So it was a very sophisticated operation. The war actually created a small boom. The port itself, more and more materials coming in, imported, exported. There was also a dockland shipbuilding company that made ships in and around where we're based here at the moment. But probably the most famous ship that they built was the Helga. In Irish history, it's become quite famous for bombarding Dublin during the Rising.
In the lead up to the First World War, industry in Ireland had fractured a lot. Most employers would have been small. The closest thing to an industrial zone would have been down here in the Docklands. That's where the big employers would have been. Politically, it's seen that the munitions industry will help the war effort. Irish soldiers are hugely important. They need to keep the numbers up, they need to keep the recruitment up. And so it's decided they'll give Ireland a munitions industry. The way most factories worked, there was about 1,250 women on the unemployment exchange in Dublin. You went down, said, I'm interested in working in a factory. They would then arrange for an interview for you. What happened here was they thought, right, let's ask on the shop floor. And so they basically went down to the guys who worked in the dockyard and they said, do you have a wife, daughter, niece, cousin, sister, etc., who'd like a job, and it's a job that's going to pay well?
From 1915 to 1918, it's an operation. It employs off and on about 200 women locally in this area, and very smaller number of men, because again, the need for men is on the Western Front.
But what everybody forgot was, from the time they could talk, those women, they were being taught to sew, they were being taught to knit, they were being taught to develop a range of skills that was the equivalent of as somebody who'd served a 6-year apprenticeship at a lathe. It was just a short jump from doing crochet or knitting. But for the girls, they just took to it like a duck to water. A lot of women, there was pride. You know, they got a badge saying they were on war service. And suddenly, they'd be going to get a tram somewhere and there'd be a queue and the tram driver would go, sorry, there's a lady there in war service, up you come, missus. A lot of the women around here would have known or were related to somebody who was fighting. The cook, for example, she had 3 sons who were in regiments fighting in France. So for a lot of people, there was a sense of they were actually contributing to help keep their family members and neighbours alive. Basically, there's 3 pieces, or 3 main parts to a shell. There's the nose cone, which contains the detonator. At the end, you have the cartridge, which was the brass piece. And then there was the centerpiece, which is actually the shell. And that's a metal container, which contains the explosives. And that's what the women made in the shell factories.
What happened was solid pieces of steel would come in, and they then would have to be cut up into the size of shells, and then they're put onto lathes, and then each piece is turned into the top part of an artillery shell. As it goes along the assembly line, the women who are employed are having to do more finer details. So the people at the beginning would be younger, less experienced, but as you go along, it becomes more and more harder work. You need to have experience of what you're doing. And that's very high-skilled work. People were being paid good money for it.
One of the things that happens in 1917 is the amount of German submarines scales up in the Irish Sea. The supplies of metal start to dry up. They're inconsistent because the ships bringing them over have been sunk. The dockyard here is hit particularly bad at one stage. But by the time you get to February, March 1918, it's very obvious it's just a matter of time before Britain wins the war.
Of course, the sad thing is once the war is over, factories are closed down all over England and Ireland very, very quickly, so they become unemployed. So there's no long-term benefit. This is a very short period of their lives. But for many of them, it was life-changing because it was good money, it was regular income coming in, and it was a new experience.
And so for that very short period of time, there's some real victories happening for women in the workforce. And this is the thing for a lot of women was they had exhibited a huge range of skills working in the shell factories. And now suddenly it was like, yeah, that's fine, Grant, go home, find something else to do. One of the women who started here as a 16-year-old, Mary Johnson, she decided, no, domestic service is not for me. She would have been earning more money than her father, who was a casual docker on the quayside. So she was the main breadwinner in her house. So for Mary, she wasn't going back to that. So she got a job as a dancer in the Tivoli Theatre. A lot of people would have frowned on that. The theatre would have been slightly disreputable, but it paid well. And it was something she was good at. And it was something she had skill at. But there seems to have been a spirit there that's left behind, that women aren't quite going to just lie down and take it.
But in many ways, after you go into 1919, and Ireland kind of returns to a more male-dominated society. So it was this kind of little blip during World War I, which makes it an exceptional, fascinating story.